Hi, welcome to Giant Screening Webinar and Fast Check. Attending today is Kelly Pugh, Head of Product at Giant Screening, and Tom, Head of Product at Konfir.
Thanks, Jenna. Hi, everyone. So yeah, this webinar is to talk to you all about fastcheck, our new screening product. So just to take it back to basics first and talk to you about what that product is and the technology. And Tom from Konfir is on the call to talk you through some of that later on in the presentation as well. But effectively, what is fastcheck? So it's a screening service that uses candidate payroll and banking data powered by the Konfir technology to give us instant verification of employment dates, as well as validation of gaps in the employment history. So it's having a really big impact on our turnaround times at the moment, bringing them down from sometimes weeks in some cases, let's be honest, to days and even hours in some cases. So it's really exciting for us. And we want to show you a bit more of the candidate journey, a bit more of some of the results that we're seeing, and then open it up to some questions later on. So to touch on the candidate journey first, obviously this is most important to us. And when fastcheck is included in the screening package, Jenna will talk about that later from a service delivery perspective. But essentially, we're going to get notification that that candidate needs to be screened. The screening package could be 3-5-year history, whatever the requirements are. And then we'll set that into the fastcheck system to request confirmation of that information from the candidate. So at this point, they're receiving a text message and an email. They're then brought into the Konfir journey to show them a little bit more about what the expectations are. Obviously, at this point, talking to them about what this product is, showing them the information that we're taking. More importantly, the information that we're not using. That's obviously some candidate concern, and we'll touch on that later in the feedback. But these screens talk to them about what this product is, how it's going to use their information, and the dates that they've given us, whether that was dates of employment or, as we mentioned, gaps in employment. And then they connect their bank account. So it's very easy. There's no data entry, no requirement to upload or download any information. They're taken through the steps to connect their bank account. We're also giving them the advice to connect any additional accounts, because that's quite common these days as people move around with some of the newer banks. We need to make sure that they know that they're connecting the bank that contains that transaction data. So it's very easy, a few steps. If they did need to connect any further bank details, then it's just a repeat of this. Connect the bank, choose the account, and then that connection happens. We've also mentioned that this is payroll data as well as banking data. So some candidates will know their payroll provider. Typically, most don't. But I think, Tom, you'll probably touch on the reach there and how that's expanding. But if we do get access to their payroll providers, they just follow these similar steps to connect the provider, provide access to the data, and then they'll get confirmation that that's all done. So from the candidate's perspective, that's it for them. They're told that if we do need further information, we'll get back in touch. But at this point, they're getting the clear comms, an update on where their screening process is, so where their screening progress is, and if they need to get in touch for further updates. Then the results are available to us. So instantly, we get access to the candidate's information. Now, these slides show the types of reports that are available to us and to you that shows the way the employment information is provided back in the candidate report. But it's important to note at this point that while the process has been automated, compliance is still paramount, and our teams are matching this data, doing several QC checks to get the information that you need. It's also important at this point to note that it also shows some undeclared periods of employment. So that can sometimes be determined during this process, giving us the additional reference points and some screening considerations. So fastcheck works alongside our standard referencing services just to give us that extra layer of compliance, where sometimes in those cases, we may need to request further periods of employment and further official references. This gives you the information and the confirmation up front. So to talk about some of the results that we've seen, we've been processing these checks with a multitude of different customers across some different demographics. Some of that we've already released. You may have seen some case studies recently, and we've got more to show as well. But this webinar was more to give you an update of some of the results and to show you how easy it is to get this included. So on that, easy to start using. I mean, that's a given, and we'll talk about that with the service delivery requirements, but it is just simply activating this within the screening package. And then that positive candidate experience is seen straight away, really. It's important at the point of talking about speed and turnaround times as well, is this this case study and this information is typically based on 3 or 5 year screening checks. But the speed here is also the assurance of the screening risk assessment really up front. So even when full official references may be required, it works alongside our standard referencing system. So where possible, we are completing these checks using the fast check data in as little as these times. But where that isn't always possible, we're seeing success in our customers achieving some conditional employment screening. So for example, in some security standards, this allows us to give more of pre-completion screening with the extra assurance for the full compliance, which can sometimes take a little bit longer when the official references are still needed. So it sits alongside, and where possible, we will always provide you with that reference information as well as the fast check data. That's important to note as well. And sometimes it's a mix, and where possible, we'll use that data 100% to achieve the completion times. This turnaround time is all about candidate conversion rates. So how quickly are they coming through the process and how many of them are adopting it? Tom will also touch on this across the board, but for us, it's 90%. So nearly 90% of our candidates are happy to come through, and they're doing that banking connection within these times, typically achieving those overall turnaround times. Okay, so doing some of those case studies, we've looked at lots of different feedback, candidate feedback first. So that's really important to us. So during these case studies, a big part of that after work was talking to them about the experience. How did they find it? Typically, we're sending these requests via text and email. That was a big focus for as well. And we'll share some information on the finer detail of this feedback. But for now, it's nice to see that it's adopted really easily. The candidates find this new system and this new product nice to use. It's what they want. They want the screening to be quick. They want it to be easy. And we're certainly showing them that that information, which they may be needing to provide elsewhere, doesn't always have to be requested. So by way of bank statements, if we're talking about gap validation, or sometimes providing the additional employment details to help us with the referencing. Customer feedback as well. So we talked about the ease of adopting this service, but I think that's really clear in some of the feedback that we've had from the customers, is when they see that this will work for them, to get it working for them is really fast. Typically the next day, with the first batch of candidates submitting their information within a few hours. And that's reflected in some of the case studies where we see some of the checks being completed within just a few business hours after fast check has been adopted. So we're keen to get some questions from you later on, and we can share some more customer feedback with those. Some of you may have already been through some of these case studies with us, and we can talk a little bit more about the feedback. Okay, so Tom, over to you now, just to talk through maybe some of the feedback from the wider industry and how you're seeing this affecting the industry.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kelly, and thanks to the broader Giant team for having me join this webinar today. So my name is Tom McAuliffe. I'm the head of product at Konfir, which is sort of powering Giant's fast check solution. And I want to start with a bit of sort of scope as to what Konfir is doing, maybe go into some of the verification services that we're offering, and then talk a bit about the sort of compliance and the stats that Kelly was talking about. So, I mean, ultimately, I guess at an industry level, depending on the role that's being hired for, there's probably between 10 and 12, 14 different checks that are being done for an individual. And at Konfir, we're really focused on those top two in employment and gap in employment checks, both of which going back as far as 6 years. And for gaps in employment, really looking at them sort of in line with 7858 and BPSS. So looking away from, I guess, the more subjective type character references that are often used for those sort of checks to sort of more matter of fact. And we'll talk about the kind of verifications that we do for that in a moment. But really, what we're looking to do here is to move these kind of checks away from something that is either manual in nature or automated to something that is truly instant and a delight to be used by customers. And I'm proud to share that we've been certified against the UK digital, the UK sort of trust framework on digital ID and attributes. So aligned to, I guess, the way that ID verification companies are certified against that same framework. If we just move on to the next slide, just to talk a little bit about sort of how Konfir sort of compares to other ways of verifying employment data, or how employment references are sort of traditionally gathered. And really, we've sort of put it into this matrix of time and data that you get back. So contacting a previous employer, there's obviously risks of the employer no longer been trading or not being able to get the right contacts and therefore not getting data back. And that really results in, I guess, delays in that reference being completed, albeit sometimes you can get back sort of more granular information. So perhaps you'll get back a reason for leaving or a job title. Through our analysis, we found that a really sort of small fraction of references across the industry actually returns that level of information. And so that's partly why we've really focused on this sort of standard reference data. So looking at where this person was working, what dates they were working there, and sort of other attributes within that, so that we can return the data in minutes and hours as opposed to sort of days and weeks. Of course, there are workarounds as well. So capturing sort of documents from candidates is another way of verifying somebody's employment history, but that can be clunky. It can, you know, it's a worse candidate experience as well. And so we're looking to move away from that into something that is, you know, truly instant and taps into the real golden sources of data in banking and payroll. Thanks, Kelly. So looking at the two sort of checks that we're doing, as I said, we've got employment and then gaps in employment. So on the employment side, we're using both our open banking connectors and then payroll and HR integrations to pull data back instantly straight from that source. And then on the gap in employment side, we're only using open banking to verify that there are no sort of associations or undeclared employments that the person isn't telling us about, that they were actually doing a particular activity, and sort of proof of sort of the account being active through a period of time. And so you can see sort of a list of the different checks that are available via Konfir on the right-hand side. The top two are sort of the main ones that we spoke to, but looking for things like an undeclared employment, either if they were sort of working multiple jobs at the same time, or perhaps there's one throughout a gap in employment that was declared. Looking for agencies as well. So this is a common problem that we see where somebody says that they work for a Tesco's as an example, but perhaps they really work for a security agency. We can instantly verify where they worked for, even if they tell us the wrong employer. And then you can look at other things like regular spending or alternative income, like benefits verification to confirm how somebody was sort of financially sustaining themselves through a gap in employment. And I guess one of the most important things, and Kelly sort of touched on this, is that we're putting the candidates in control as opposed to trying to do something, you know, under the hood or malicious. Everything is done at the explicit consent and authentication of the individual. And so being transparent is really core to everything that we're doing at Konfir, and I'm sure Kelly and the team will say the same for Giant. And it really shows through our conversion rate. So we spoke to the 89% mark. We see that sort of across industry, somewhere between the 80% mark up until sort of closing in on 100%. So people are genuinely comfortable doing this sort of, or using this sort of technology to verify this process, knowing that it will help them either complete the screening more quickly if they're being hired and then being screened afterwards, or for some people getting into their job more quickly, where the screening is needed to actually onboard them into that role. And Kelly spoke to the screen on the left-hand side, but particularly being clear about what we're not doing around, you know, contacting previous employers, sharing the sort of the minute salary details, or spending transactions where it's not needed is really important to candidates. And ultimately, the whole open banking process is regulated by the FCA. So it's not as if, I guess, Konfir or anybody for that fact could, you know, go along and start doing this without having the regulatory requirements behind it. And I think finally, from me, just to share a bit of an overview as to sort of how Konfir is being used across the industry, and Kelly and team have some great examples of how it's been used within Giant already. But we're seeing really good sort of uptake from both employers and candidates across all sectors. So security, financial services, retail, just to name a few, are sort of some of the areas that we're seeing really good success, and helping people get into work more quickly without sort of having to wait the days and weeks to actually complete that verification process. So I think that's probably everything from me. I believe I'm handing over to Jenna to sort of wrap up.
I think
Thanks,
at this
Tom.
point, sorry, Jen, if we can just, at
That's
this
okay.
point, if we can launch a quick poll as well, just before the questions. Just a few questions to see what you guys think about the information that you've seen today. Sorry, over to you, Jen, for some questions, hopefully.
No, that's okay. I was just going to ask if anyone had any questions around the things that Kelly and Tom have presented. You're more than welcome to use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll be able to answer those questions. In addition, I know that Kel does have a screen to show everybody, but any additional queries or questions on the fast check process, how it works, or also how it can be configured or implemented within any of your existing brands or workflows, can be directed to service delivery. The implementation, the setup is very quick because we have all of the information there. It's just a couple of clicks our side to implement this as well in regards to also adding the information to the candidates. It's important that we obviously advise and make the candidate aware of the process and the guidance as well. So all of those can be directed to service delivery. We can run through some of the questions, Kelly and Tom.
Yeah, we got some, that's great.
Perfect. I think so. One of the questions is, of the 11% that have rejected this, what is the common reasons for refusal? Tom, I know you've probably got some great examples, and then we'll have some examples specifically for our candidates as well.
Yeah, sure. So actually the main reason for people not connecting is purely we're not able to get hold of them. So of that remaining percent, that remaining 11%, the majority of those we just can't get in touch with. So they never touch the SMS or the email that we send to them. There's a smaller percentage, I think it's around 2% of that, or 2% of total, that simply aren't comfortable with it. And absolutely, we expect a sort of a small population of people to fall into that. But the main reason is just responsiveness to the check being sent.
Yep. The next question, so I know I touched on this in regards to specific brands and workflows around the costs to add this into any existing packages or as a standalone. I will be able to answer those if you wouldn't mind directing them to the service delivery email address. I'll be ensuring that all of these emails are responded to after the webinar as well. Kelly will be able to show the screen at the end with all of the details where you guys can get in touch. I think, Tom, this is a question for you. If an individual has had a period of unpaid leave, for example, long-term sick, but they've exhausted sick pay, so they were still employed but not working, how does this get picked up on the checks?
Yeah, so it'll depend on the data that comes back from either payroll or banking. So for from payroll, you would see the exact start and end dates, as well as potentially things like a job title, which I think was asked on another question. So all that information would come back via payroll, and then on the banking side, you would see when this person has been paid and when they haven't been. So you'd be able to see all of the transactions from whoever the payer is, the first and last payments, to make up the sort of the payment dates. And if there was a gap, I would expect, and Kelly can maybe talk to this from a Giant process perspective, there would be some kind of explanation as to the reason behind that from the candidate.
Absolutely, yeah. Just showing this slide again to show the kind of information that comes back to us. And whilst it is an automated data transfer, obviously our teams are looking at this. It's going through several checks, matching the information against the information that the candidate has provided against what's come back. And yeah, any discrepancies, all checked and dealt with. And that's where our standard referencing is always there in the background working away.
We've had a few questions and comments around, are we going to continue with the normal referencing, and how does that work? Is fast check in replace? So just to answer this from a service delivery perspective, Kelly, please feel free to jump in as well from a Giant perspective. So the fast check doesn't remove the requirement for us internally within operations to process the normal referencing. They both go hand in hand. Due to the fast check returning as quickly as it does, we would then use the fast check data to close down those references to verify the information that the candidate and their work history is correct. However, if for an example, the fast check returns and that data doesn't cover that referencing period, we will still continue to reference. Both of them will go hand in hand, and we will still continue with the exhausting the chaser cycles, the telephone calls, and the referee chasers as well.
Yeah, that's really important to confirm as well. So yeah, it becomes, they work alongside. So effectively, when the candidate is submitting their screening application to us, we are requesting all of the references as normal. We're doing that normal validation. We're contacting them with our standard request in the hope of receiving that official reference. But at the same time, where possible, we're sending the candidate the text to connect their bank account. And I guess it becomes a bit of a race then. What comes back first? Is it the employment reference? Is it the banking data? And like I touched on, in some cases, we will be able to use all of that banking data to complete the screening. Sometimes we can use it as part assurance and still need to carry on with that extra referencing. Whether we do statuses of part completion, that's always there. And even when we do complete with fast check data, we've already requested the references. At the point of completion, you'll have what's come back. If anything is received afterwards, that will also be added to the screening file as well. So like I said, it's a bit of a mix in some cases, but where we can use 100% of the data, that's where you'll see those quick same day turnaround times in some cases.
There is a question around, will this work if the employer has opted to share the information with us? So the answer to that is yes. The employee does require to provide their explicit consent, which I believe, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, is the first part of the Konfir process. We do require the candidate to provide consent for us to obtain their data and process, and obviously share this information with Giant Screening's client too.
Yeah, that's right.
So there is a question around the candidate needing to have been with the bank for the duration of the check, and if they change banks, for example, would they also be asked for the previous bank details? So I know, Tom, you picked that up. Kelly showed the screen as well. So this is just around how they can link more than one bank account.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got, I guess, logic built into the platform that actively looks at what data has been pulled back from the first account that they connected. And so if we can't find information from that first account to cover all of the periods that are needed to complete all of the candidates' checks that are required, then we'll actively ask them to connect another one. Something that we see quite frequently, and Kelly alluded to this, is when somebody has a spending account for everyday expenses and then one perhaps for their salary, that sometimes they'll go and connect their spending account first, which doesn't include all the data that they need. So yes, absolutely, it's something that we're really conscious of, because we want to keep that journey as sort of concise as possible.
We do have a question, which I think is a really great question for us to clarify on. It's around requesting, does it work for all employers, or do they have to have linked or integrated Konfir into their systems to be able to share the payroll data? So I think it's really important that we touch on the payroll data being separate from the banking data, for example, where we retrieve those from, and how you retrieve that information.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we do have the ability for employers to connect their data to us, but it's not the primary source that we go to. And as you pointed out, we've got two main sources. The first is on the open banking side, and we cover around 95% of the bank population in the UK today, which essentially means we can cover practically all employers, no matter how big or how small, via our banking integration. And then on the payroll side, we currently cover around 40% of current employment through payroll. Obviously, it's kind of demographic specific, but we're continuously adding sort of new payroll and HR integrations into the mix so that we can, over time, be able to give you data from both of those sources. And on that side, I guess I saw another question as well on an employer having to sort of opt in. That's essentially how it would work with our payroll partners. So the payroll partner will sort of liaise with all of the employers directly, make sure that they're comfortable sort of sharing the data via Konfir onwards to yourselves to complete the check. But the banking side will be sort of pretty close to 100% of employers. A final clarification I just wanted to make, we're not retaining any of the data on the Konfir side, so we're purely processing the data on behalf of you guys and on behalf of the candidate themselves, and the data is sort of taken one time only. So we take it once from the source that it's stored in, and then sent through to Giant to complete the checks.
There was also a question around being able to see a demo. I'm assuming from a candidate's perspective, because there is no difference from a client's perspective in regards to starting that check in our system. We've just implemented fast check as a requirement in the background. It's then for Giant Screening to prompt that to begin, and then the candidate's journey. So I know Kelly and Tom, the webinar will be shared, the recording, sorry, with all of the attendees. But in addition, is there the possibility of us being able to share that candidate journey?
We've got some video content and we can set up some demos, yeah. Part of the implementation, I mean, we will work with you guys in service delivery to provide those. So yeah, no problem at all.
Perfect. I think that was majority of the questions that we've answered. Oh, sorry, this is actually a really great question. I think it's mainly for Tom. So how does this work with limited company contractors where bank accounts are business accounts? Are they able to link those via Konfir too?
Yes, so you can connect both personal and business bank accounts anywhere in the UK and Ireland. So we cover, as I said, pretty much every single big bank and most of the sort of smaller ones as well. So even if they are sort of self-employed or they're a sort of a company contractor, it will work for them.
Perfect. And another great question as well. We get asked this a lot, especially in service delivery from all the screening checks that we run. But I think it's really great for us to expand on how we ensure that their data is kept secure. Obviously, the privacy notice and the consent is included there at the start of the Konfir journey. So just around especially now individuals being hesitant to share any details at all to us, also their bank account details, how to Konfir ensure that this is kept safe. And I know you touched on this in regards to it's obtained from source once and then passed over. So you guys at Konfir don't hold any of the data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess what I would say on top of that is that we effectively minimize the data that's being shared as well. So if there's information that isn't needed from somebody's bank account, then we're not interested in it because we don't need it. So we're only looking to share the information that's strictly required for that verification to be completed. And then of course, above and beyond that, you know, we've got strict information security, privacy and security controls to make sure that the technology and the organization as a whole is sort of adhering to the sort of industry best standards in all of those categories.
And just from a service delivery perspective, Giant Screening as a whole, apologies, to mirror what Tom's saying, the details from the fast check are uploaded to our system, our secure screening portal, exactly the same as they are for all other checks as well that we process. The only individuals that are able to access that are those that have the authority via your brand specifically, that are dictated by yourselves. We run our twice yearly audit as well of the individuals that have access to the data from your perspective, from your brand, and we'll continue to do so. I think that was all of our questions answered. But again, I know I mentioned earlier, if there's any other questions or queries after the webinar, please don't hesitate to contact service delivery and we'll be able to respond.
Okay, thanks everyone, just in time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Thank you.